Maybe you've wondered whether meditation was really necessary for Buddhist practice. That's an interesting question, one we're going to deal with in today's video. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute. That's onlinedharma.org, where you can receive courses, find courses about early Buddhist Dharma, taught from a contemporary perspective if you want to know more. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel. And I'll have videos out once a week on these kinds of topics, and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. The idea for this video came from a question I had a while back from A. Mick, who asks, he says, I'm always facing a very busy day. Finding 15 minutes or less to meditate is not always practical for my situation. Does that make me less of a Buddhist? All I get out of meditation is relaxing and sitting only with my breath. And I think A. Mick is describing a question that many of us may have had, a concern that many of us may have. I myself do 30 minutes of meditation a day, which is down from 45 minutes I used to do many years ago, and partly because I feel like I don't have enough time to do the sort of meditation that I perhaps should. And I think many of us are in that kind of situation where we feel as though meditation may be useful to us, maybe, but we don't really have the time for it. So the question is, can we do without it? And this is actually a question that goes back quite a long ways. There's a sutta in the early texts where the Buddha is actually asked a similar question by a laywoman named Dhammadina, who came to the Buddha with a large group of other lay people, perhaps lay women, it's not clear, to ask the Buddha about the correct practice for people in their situation. Dhammadina asks the Buddha essentially what they should do as correct practice. They're obviously lay people, but the Buddha tells her and the crowd that's come along with her to essentially study and practice deep kinds of meditation, in particular meditations on emptiness. And I did earlier videos on the doctrine, the early doctrine of emptiness and the related kinds of practices. And I'll put a link to the doctrine video down below in the show notes, and you can watch that and then the videos after it about the practices. And the thing that to recall, though, about these kinds of practices is that they were difficult. They involve a long period of meditation. They're not the sort of things that we can do easily in short periods of time in our lives. And the Buddha was also telling them to do what we might term a sutta study as well, to memorize suttas, to recall them, to perhaps discuss them. They didn't have books back then. There's no record of written suttas during the time of the Buddha. So these would have had to have been memorized. They would have had to have been listened to, perhaps memorizing the words that the Buddha told them at this kind of event, or the words of other monastics who might have taught them similar kinds of things. So he was asking them to do quite a bit. But Dhammadina's reply to the Buddha is really quite interesting, and I think perhaps reflects some of our own kinds of feelings. She says, Sir, we live at home with our children, using sandalwood imported from Kasi, wearing garlands, perfumes, and makeup, and accepting gold and money. That is, what she's telling the Buddha here is that, remember that we're lay people. We don't have a whole lot of time to devote to these kinds of practices. We don't have the time to devote several hours a day, perhaps, to meditation, to devote several additional hours, perhaps, to sutta study, to memorizing suttas, recalling them, discussing them, because we have our own lives. We have children. We enjoy the finer things in life at times as well, as people would have during the Buddha's lifetime, and indeed even more so perhaps today. So what she's saying is basically, do we need to do these kinds of things? Is there another approach? Does this, going back to the original question here, does this make us somehow bad Buddhists or bad practitioners of the Buddha Dharma? Well, first off, we don't really need to apply long periods to meditation. That is beneficial if we have the time for it and the inclination to do it, but it isn't absolutely necessary. There certainly are great benefits that we can get simply by sitting for even short periods of time every day and getting to know our own minds. Now, what our original question here from A. Mick had to say was that basically, he sat and watched his breath for a while and perhaps to calm him down slightly, but that didn't seem to him like it was a great benefit. Obviously, the more time you put in, the greater the benefit can be. So it may be that the only amount of time that he had only gave him a small result. Nevertheless, it can be a benefit simply to be slightly calmer than you were before. That gives you a slightly clearer picture of your own life. And it also gives you a slightly clearer picture of your own mind. And getting to know our own mind is really the part of the goal here with meditative practice, is to get to know ourselves and how we react to things in the world better, so that we know better when we're behaving in ways or acting in ways or thinking in ways that are not helpful to us. Oftentimes, if we don't know our own minds, we tend to go on autopilot and do the same kinds of things over and over again when really we should learn to do otherwise. So that's one thing that we can say. Now, the Buddha himself, however, went on to talk to Dhammadina about a slightly different take here. What he says is that she should have what the Pali word is avijjapasada. It means, it's been variously translated as experiential confidence or as unshakable faith. And she should have this kind of attitude of avijjapasada in the Buddha himself, in the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, and in the Sangha, that is the group of accomplished monastics. She should have this kind of confidence, this kind of faith in him, in the Dharma, and in the monastics. And if she has this kind of faith, then she's practicing properly, or at least partially practicing properly, for a layperson. That is to say that the Buddha is suggesting that she put her work, instead of putting her work on meditation, let's say, and on sutta study, which perhaps takes too much effort and too much time, if instead she puts her effort on attempting to gain this kind of confidence, at least, confidence in the Buddha as a teacher, confidence in the Buddha's teaching, that is a good step forward. Now, there's a big gulf here between at least the English words of confidence and faith. Many of us will associate the term faith with blind faith, with this idea that we should believe in something whether or not we have reason to believe in it. And in fact, in some versions of, let's say, Western religions, it seems even to be more beneficial to believe in certain things blindly rather than to believe based on reason. However, we don't find this kind of idea in early Buddhism. The idea instead is that we should gain this kind of confidence based on our own experience. So, for example, we should see what works in our lives and we gain confidence in teachings by understanding or seeing directly that they're useful to us. We may gain confidence in the Buddha as a teacher by seeing that his teachings are useful to us. We may gain confidence in the Sangha of monastics, let's say, by seeing that the teachings that they provide us and the organization or the community that they have is a good one. And of course, to the extent that we can't see these things, then of course we're not going to have this kind of faith. But we can at least attempt to generate confidence in these ways by investigating and seeing whether or not they work for us. But this path does demand effort. It's not a path, although it's a path of perhaps somewhat less effort, as less time may be required for it. Nevertheless, it does require us, or require Dhammadina and the other lay people around her, to do some work, to do some investigation, to try out the Dharma and the perhaps easier kinds of practices in their own lives in order to gain confidence in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that at least is a way of practicing as a good Buddhist, if you like, because you're gaining closeness to the Buddha himself as a figure, to the Buddha's teaching, and to the Sangha. Now, what the Buddha doesn't end there. The Buddha also tells Dhammadina to act in ways that are ethical, and that therefore, he says, to promote what we might term calm concentration. So, we may know that the Buddha's primary recommendation to lay people was to behave ethically. That is, if you could do nothing else, if you had no other time for anything in your lives, then at least have time for ethical behavior. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit sexual misconduct, and don't abuse intoxicants. These are the kinds of ethical strictures that the Buddha recommended. But what he says here is that you shouldn't just do them to do them. You're doing them because they promote calm concentration. That is to say, that ethical behavior also is a spur to meditation. It helps us to become calmer in our lives because we have less regrets. We're overcoming the regrets that tend to befall us when we do things that are unethical. And we also become calmer because people will be less, let's say, angry with us because they can see that we're not behaving unethically. They don't have any reason to fight us, to be angry with us, to make our lives more difficult. And so for that reason as well, and many others, our lives tend to calm down when we behave in ways that are kind, when we behave in ways that are compassionate. And when we do that as a result, it makes meditation or some of the results of meditation more easily achievable. That is, we can become calmer. When we're calmer, whether or not we're meditating for a half an hour a day or whatever it might be, we're able to see our lives more clearly. We're able to see our minds more clearly. And this is true whether or not we consider ourselves a Buddhist, whether or not we're trying to become a good Buddhist. That is to say, ethical behavior is good for all of us, no matter what we call ourselves, or what we don't call ourselves. Ethical practice is the sort of thing that helps all of us become calmer, become better people, become able to produce a better world with better people around us, if you like. And that is the kind of aim that we should all have, no matter what we call ourselves. Now, meditation practice in particular, is extremely useful as an adjunct to this. As we get deeper into the practice, meditation practice may even be necessary for some of us. Perhaps not all of us, but certainly for some of us, pursuing meditation on a regular basis can indeed, we'll find, make our lives better in a way that really no other practice will. And this is about being a better person of whatever type of person we happen to be. A better person whether we're Buddhist, whether we're not Buddhist, whatever. And what I would suggest at this point is take a look at an earlier video of mine on beginning Buddhist practice if you want to get an idea of where to start with all of this, whether it be meditation or not meditation. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks so much to my patrons over on Patreon for all of your support, and we'll catch you on the next video. Meanwhile, all of you be well.